And Lord, just be ministered to also by your word. We just pray that you would speak to us through your word today. Lord, we're going to cover some ugly passages, but Lord, there's some good things in there for us too. And we just pray that you would help us to glean from that everything that you have for us. And we'll give you the glory, Lord, in the way that you work in and through our lives as a result of us being here today. In Jesus' name, amen. Right, so we are in Judges 19. In Judges 19, and in movies, when somebody invests their money in something, oftentimes they like double their money overnight, sort of thing. We've seen that many times, and I have a slide here of what the stock market really looks like. This isn't going to be a stock market talk. I wouldn't be an expert, that's for sure. But in real life, investing doesn't go just like double your money overnight, right? It's more like this jagged line you see here behind us. At some points going up, at other points going down. But when you look at it over time, it does generally go up, right? Over time, it is clearly going up. And I think that I wanted to have that picture because it's a good picture really of our lives, isn't it? As believers. I mean, we have some times that we have some setbacks, but generally when you look at the life of a Christian, as we're walking with the Lord, it's always trending up. Even though there may be some times where, we've made some wrong choices or whatever, we still look at it and we see, God's still working there. He's still making us more like Jesus, and we're trending in the right direction. We're trending up as He prepares us for heaven. And so as we come to Judges 19, we're looking at a time when things were definitely trending down for Israel. That stock market ticker was dropping. So let's read starting in Judges 19 at verse 1. It says, "Now it came about in those days when there was no king in Israel, that there was a certain Levite staying in the remote part of the hill country of Ephraim, who took a concubine for himself from Bethlehem in Judah. But his concubine played the harlot against him. And she went away from him to her father's house in Bethlehem in Judah, and was there for a period of 4 months. Then her husband arose and went after her to speak tenderly to her in order to bring her back, taking with him his servant and a pair of donkeys. So she brought him into her father's house. And when the girl's father saw him, he was glad to meet him. His father-in-law, the girl's father, detained him, and he remained with them 3 days. So they ate and drank and lodged there. Now on the 4th day they got up early in the morning, and he prepared to go. And the girl's father said to his son-in-law, 'Sustain yourself with a piece of bread, and afterward you may go.' So both of them sat down and ate and drank together. And the girl's father said to the man, 'Please be willing to spend the night, and let your heart be merry.' Then the man arose to go, but his father-in-law urged him, so that he spent the night there again. On the 5th day he arose to go early in the morning, and the girl's father said, 'Please sustain yourself, and wait until afternoon.' So both of them ate. When the man arose to go, along with his concubine and servant, his father-in-law, the girl's father said to him, 'Behold, now the day is drawn to a close. Please spend the night. Lo, the day is coming to an end. Spend the night here, that your heart may be merry. Then tomorrow you may arise early for your journey, so that you may go home.' But the man was not willing to spend the night. So he arose and departed, and came to a place opposite Jabus, that is Jerusalem. And there were with him a pair of saddled donkeys. His concubine also was with him. When they were near Jabus, the day was almost gone, and the servant said to his master, 'Please come and let us turn aside into this city of the Jebusites and spend the night in it.' However, his father said to him, or his master said to him, 'We will not turn aside into the city of foreigners who are not of the sons of Israel, but we will go on as far as Gibeah.' He said to his servant, 'Come and let us approach one of these places, and we will spend the night in Gibeah or Ramah.' So they passed along and went their way, and the sun set on them near Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. They turned aside there in order to enter and lodge in Gibeah. When they entered, they sat down in the open square of the city, for no one took them into his house to spend the night. Then behold, an old man was coming out of the field from his work at evening. Now the man was from the hill country of Ephraim, and he was staying in Gibeah. But the men of the place were Benjamites. And he lifted up his eyes and saw the traveler in the open square of the city. And the old man said, 'Where are you going, and where do you come from?' He said to him, "We are passing from Bethlehem in Judah to the remote part of the hill country of Ephraim, for I am from there. And I went to Bethlehem in Judah. But I am now going to my house, and no man will take me into his house. Yet there is both straw and fodder for our donkeys, and also bread and wine for me, your maidservant, and the young man who is with your servants. There is no lack of anything." The old man said, "Peace to you, only let me take care of all your needs. However, do not spend the night in the open square." So he took him into his house and gave the donkeys fodder, and they washed their feet and ate and drank. While they were celebrating, behold, the men of the city, certain worthless fellows, surrounded the house, pounding the door, and they spoke to the owner of the house, the old man, saying, "Bring out the man who came into your house, that we may have relations with him." Then the man, the owner of the house, went out to them and said to them, "No, my fellows, please do not act so wickedly. Since this man has come into my house, do not commit this act of folly. Here is my virgin daughter and his concubine. Please let me bring them out, that you may ravish them and do to them whatever you wish, but do not commit such an act of folly against this man." But the men would not listen to him. So the man seized his concubine and brought her out to them, and they raped her and abused her all night until morning. Then let her go at the approach of dawn. As the day began to dawn, the woman came and fell at the doorway of the man's house where her master was until full daylight. When her master arose in the morning and opened the doors of the house and went out to go his way, then behold, his concubine was laying at the doorway of the house with her hands on the threshold. He said to her, "Get up and let us go." But there was no answer. Then he placed her on the donkey, and the man arose and went to his home. So as I said, some very ugly, really disturbing, passages here that we're reading. Some very dark times, clearly in Israel. And we'll talk a little bit about the characters in this terrible drama. First of all is the Levite. He's sort of the main character. And he's living there in Ephraim, this Levite. He's not living at Shiloh, where the Ark of the Covenant is, where the tabernacle is where you expect a Levite. But no, he's living in Ephraim. And this is not the same Levite we looked at in chapter 18 and before. We know about that man's family, and we know that he was living with the Danites at this point, and so he wasn't living there in Ephraim. And the fact that this man, so the first thing, that kind of makes us suspicious of this man, this Levite, is that he's not with the other Levites. He's out living by himself in Ephraim. The second thing, though, is the fact that he took a concubine and not a proper wife. He just has a concubine. That's a little unusual, too. It tells us not everything is right with this guy right off. He definitely does not seem like a moral person. From verses 4 through 9, he seems to enjoy partying with his father-in-law. It seems like what he was doing there. But much worse, we can't believe what happens around verse 25, where he gives his wife, his concubine, to this mob. And then from verse 27, we can tell he just went to sleep, because it says he arose the next morning. So he basically went to sleep while he left his wife in this terrible place. Who can imagine doing such an evil thing to anyone, let alone your own wife? And so let's talk a little bit about the wife, the concubine. She's a woman from Bethlehem, and the term concubine, and we see concubines, they pop up many times in the Old Testament. But this was not an arrangement ordained by God. This was not what God had in mind. It clearly was work of the flesh. And a concubine, basically, it meant this woman was a second-class wife. And so she was considered a wife, but sort of a second-class wife. Any children that they may have together, depending on their agreement, may not be entitled to any inheritance. Sort of the deal it could be. Most likely she would have come from a poorer family, and so she had no dowry, and that's what ended her up as a concubine. That's usually why someone became a concubine, was there was no dowry for them. Concubines often came into play when a man's wife was unable to have children. Then they'd say, well, I need an heir, so they'd bring in a concubine sort of thing. But in this case, there's actually no wife, so it seems like he just, to deal with his loneliness or whatever, he acquires a concubine here instead of a proper wife. And then the father of the concubine, this man, he just wants his son-in-law to stay, doesn't he? I mean, you get that. It's after 5 days, please stay. He's like, don't leave. Let's eat, drink, and be merry. And really, I mean, his affinity for his son-in-law is really the only warmth of feeling we see in this chapter, is that he really desires for his son-in-law to stay with him. And then there's the Ephraimite old man. This man is actually really the only decent person in this chapter that we can tell, although we can't even justify all his actions. When these men come knocking at the door, he offers his own daughter, to this mob. We can't imagine. That's hard for us to reckon. How could anyone even consider such a thing? When the Levite and his group came to Gibeah, no one would take them in. And that's, a little unusual to us. Why would you expect someone to take you into their house if they don't know you? But in their culture, this was the practice. Hospitality was very important in their culture. As a traveling Israelite, you wouldn't stay in an inn or a hotel or something like that. Someone would invite you in, to stay at their house. You'd be under the protection of their roof, like we see the Ephraimite does eventually. And they're going to make sure your feet get washed and all your needs are taken care of while you're there. But no one else in Gibeah offers this, right? And that tells us right away something is wrong in this town, that no one offers any hospitality to these people. In fact, the town square where they're planning to stay is sort of like the last place of resort. And they were content to stay there. You saw what the Levite said in verse 19. They had food, they had stuff for their animals. They were good. We can stay out here. It's fine. Apparently it wasn't a rainy night or anything like that. But the Ephraimite knows that it's not safe for them to do that in Gibeah. And so in verse 20, he's very insistent. No, you need to come into my house. You can't stay out here. And then we come to the men of Gibeah. And, these were Israelites. They were of the tribe of Benjamin. And, the Levite, as they're making their way to Gibeah, he insists that they don't stay in Jabus. You saw that in verse 11. And Jabus, as it says in my translation, is modern-day Jerusalem, is what Jabus was. But at that time, it was still ruled by the Jebusites. It wasn't until the time of King David that it gets conquered by Israel and becomes Jerusalem. And so the Levite, he says, look, we got to stay with other Israelites. It's not going to be safe if we stay with these pagans, right? We got to stay with other Israelites where it's going to be safe. Well, he found out, tragically, that it wasn't safe with the Benjamites there in Gibeah. The words and the actions of these men of Benjamin reads like that of the men of Sodom back in Genesis chapter 19 toward Lot's visitors. Remember, the angels come to visit him. No one knows they're angels at this point, but they come to visit him, and they try and get Lot to send them out to him so they can do exactly what these men are wanting to do with the Levite. And so it's shocking to see this repeated in the Bible, and this time from the mouths of Israelites who would know about that story from Genesis 19. Their desire is to rape this man who's come to town in verse 22. That's what it means by having relations with him. And so rather than protecting visitors, which is what the men of Gibeah should have been doing, that's how they should have been offering hospitality and so forth, they see them as sport to be used and thrown out. That's what their plan is. Clearly, these are just the most evil men you can imagine. That's really all we can see here. Well, chapter 19 is chronicling some dark times, and it gets a little darker here as we finish chapter 19 at verse 29. I didn't read that previously. Speaking of the Levite, it says, when he entered his house, he took a knife and laid hold of his concubine and cut her in 12 pieces, limb by limb, and sent her throughout the territory of Israel. All who saw it said, nothing like this has ever happened or been seen from the day when the sons of Israel came up from the land of Egypt to this day. Consider it, take counsel, and speak up. And so this is a bizarre way that he sends out a call to action here about what's happened. The Levite, does it really in a despicable way, to draw attention to his plight by actually cutting up the dead body of his wife and sending those pieces to the tribes of Israel. As disgusting as this is, as unnerving as this is, it is apparently successful. People, they see that and they're shocked, when they see this. they're appalled at it. And clearly there must have been, messengers that went with the body. They didn't have FedEx back then. So someone had to deliver it, and they must have brought a letter or shared this message about what had happened with the people there. And so, we're seeing that they're prepared for action. And that's what we're going to see as we move into chapter 20. Chapter 19 kind of sets this up, but now in chapter 20, we're going to see what happens here next in Israel as they prepare now for the work of God. That's the first thing we're going to see in chapter 20, as they prepare for the work of God. At Judges 20, verse 1, it says, "Then all the sons of Israel from Dan to Beersheba, including the land of Gilead, came out, and the congregation assembled as one man into the Lord at Mizpah. The chiefs of all the people, even of all the tribes of Israel, took their stand in the assembly of the people of God, 400,000 foot soldiers who drew the sword. Now the sons of Benjamin heard that the sons of Israel had gone up to Mizpah. And the sons of Israel said, 'Tell us, how did this wickedness take place?' So the Levite, the husband of the woman who was murdered, answered and said, 'I came with my concubine to spend the night at Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. But the men of Gibeah rose up against me and surrounded the house at night because of me. They intended to kill me. Instead, they ravished my concubine so that she died. And I took hold of my concubine and cut her in pieces and sent her throughout the land of Israel's inheritance. For they have committed a lewd and disgraceful act in Israel. Behold, all you sons of Israel, give your advice and counsel here.' Then all the people arose as one man, saying, 'Not one of us will go to his tent, nor will any of us return to his house. But now this is the thing which we will do to Gibeah. We will go up against it by lot. And we will take 10 men out of 100 throughout the tribes of Israel, and 100 out of 1,000, and 1,000 out of 10,000, to supply food for the people, that when they come to Gibeah of Benjamin, they may punish them for all the disgraceful acts they have committed in Israel.' Thus all the men of Israel were gathered against the city, united as one man." And so the tribes of Israel, except for Benjamin, all come together here. It talks about how they came from Dan, which we know they migrated up to the north. We talked about that last time. And it talks about all the way down to Beersheba, which is the southern part of Judah, so the southern part of Israel. So from all across Israel, they've come together at Mizpah, which Mizpah is in the region of the Benjamites. So they know what's going on. They see this large crowd gathering here in their own territory. But they gathered together to address this terrible crime. The Levites' method was grotesque, as I've already said, but it was effective. And now all Israel hears the details from his mouth of what happened here. And they vow that they're going to right this wrong. And I would suggest to you here that it's clear that they're acting as God would have them act. Clearly what they're doing is in the right. Each town was actually under the law to have officers to uphold the law in case something evil happened, right? In case someone broke the law. In Deuteronomy 16, starting at verse 18, Deuteronomy 16:18 says, "You shall appoint for yourself judges and officers in all your towns, which the Lord your God is giving you, according to your tribes, and they shall judge the people with righteous judgment. You shall not distort justice, you shall not be partial, and you shall not take a bribe, for a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and perverts the words of the righteous. Justice and only justice you shall pursue, that you may live and possess the land which the Lord your God is giving you." So clearly they were to have these men that were really kind of enforce the law, make sure that things that, evil that happened like this especially would be dealt with. But in this case, we see that this town is not dealing with it, and the entire tribe of Benjamin is not dealing with it. They're just letting it go on. They have no intention of upholding the law. And the law is clear. From Deuteronomy 22, I'm not going to read this, but Deuteronomy 22 and verse 25, it talks about how a rapist is to be put to death. And a murderer also, from Exodus 21 verse 12. Exodus 21:12 says, "He who strikes a man so that he dies shall surely be put to death." And so this woman, with all the affliction that was put on her, she died from it. So clearly all these people, if for no other reason, they needed to be put to death for that, for her murder. All of Israel is going to ensure that this takes place. They're going to ensure this punishment is inflicted. These tribes are fired up and they're ready to go. They've committed resources to it. We see that. They all have skin in this game. In fact, we're going to find out when we get to chapter 21 next time that they had no tolerance for anyone who was not on board. I mean, literally zero tolerance. We'll see that when we come to chapter 21. And you can see why they'd be fired up. I mean, there's such a clear call to action. I mean, it angers us to think of this going on, that this happened all these thousands of years ago. And yet there they were right then talking to the husband of this wife. There can be no doubt that they're doing what God would have them do. And we're going to see that God actually affirms that as we go forward in our chapter. Their emotion and dedication here is really, what we feel when God puts something on our hearts for Him too, isn't it? It's clear in our hearts and our minds what His call is, and we're very excited about it. We're passionate about it. And we can only imagine the amazing things that God's going to do as we follow Him in His will. We're ready to go. But then sometimes things don't go quite like we expect. Like Israel does next, we encounter some setbacks in God's will. Let's look at chapter 20, verse 12. Judges 20:12 says, "Then the tribes of Israel sent men through the entire tribe of Benjamin, saying, 'What is this wickedness that has taken place among you? Now then, deliver up the men, the worthless fellows in Gibeah, that we may put them to death and remove this wickedness from Israel.' But the sons of Benjamin would not listen to the voice of their brothers, the sons of Israel. The sons of Benjamin gathered from the cities to Gibeah to go out to battle against the sons of Israel. From the cities on that day, the sons of Benjamin were numbered 26,000 men who draw the sword, besides the inhabitants of Gibeah, who were numbered 700 choice men. Out of all these people, 700 choice men were left-handed. Each one could sling a stone at a hair and not miss. Then the men of Israel, besides Benjamin, were numbered 400,000 men who draw the sword. All these were men of war." So the first setback that they have as they're following God's will here is that others don't agree about God's will, right? And that happens to us too, doesn't it? Sometimes that as they go out here, in their case, all these other tribes have come to Benjamin, they present the case, they demand the evildoers be brought out and all this so that this wickedness can be driven out of the land. But shockingly, the men of Benjamin refuse to give them. They're taking the side of these perverted murderers over God's law, over what's right. They're opposing God Himself, actually, here, in effect, is what they're doing. And it's not just talk. Benjamin says, all right, let's get ready for war. They assemble all the troops there at Gibeah. I mean, they're like, we're going to throw down over this thing. They would rather risk annihilation from a host, it's just many times larger than who they are. 26,000 compared to 400,000. I mean, even if you have 700 sharpshooters there, left-handed sharpshooters, that's not going to be much amidst 400,000 soldiers. It's a huge army assembled against them. But they're willing to do this. They're not willing to give up these handful of men. Instead, they're going to risk annihilation of their entire tribe over this. And so we see this is a setback to Israel fulfilling God's will, don't we? I mean, these guys are obstinate against them. The Benjamites should have seen that these men deserve judgment. It's so clear. But now there's going to be war. And like I've already inferred, the experience of Israel here is not uncommon for us whenever we set out to do God's will, that we encounter sometimes setbacks. We have a clear vision of what God would have us do. We're pumped up about it. We're ready to go. We're walking in faith in that direction. But then there's someone who maybe things doesn't happen, or maybe none of those things happen. And we're like, what happened, God? I mean, we're following your will. How can this be that we're having these setbacks? We're sure of His direction, but we're blocked. So what do we do then? What do we do when we encounter these setbacks? Well, we seek the Lord. And that's what we see Israel does next. They seek the Lord in all this. Look at Judges 20:18. It says, "Now the sons of Israel arose, went up to Bethel, and inquired of God, and said, 'Who shall go up first for us to battle against the sons of Benjamin?' Then the Lord said, 'Judah shall go up first.' So the sons of Israel arose in the morning and camped against Gibeah. the men of Israel went out to battle against Benjamin, and the men of Israel arrayed for battle against them at Gibeah. Then the sons of Benjamin came out of Gibeah and felled to the ground on that day 22,000 men of Israel. But the people, the men of Israel, encouraged themselves and arrayed for battle again in the place where they had arrayed themselves the first day. The sons of Israel went up and wept before the Lord until evening and inquired of the Lord, saying, Shall we again draw near for battle against the sons of my brother Benjamin? And the Lord said, Go up against them. Then the sons of Israel came against the sons of Benjamin the second day. Benjamin went out against them from Gibeah the second day and fell to the ground 18,000 men of the sons of Israel. All these drew the sword. Then all the sons of Israel and all the people went up and came to Bethel and wept. Thus they remained there before the Lord and fasted that day until evening, and they offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. The sons of Israel inquired of the Lord, for the ark of the covenant of God was there in those days, and Phinehas the son of Eleazar, Aaron's son, stood before it to minister in those days, saying, Shall I yet again go out to battle against the sons of my brother Benjamin, or shall I cease? And the Lord said, Go up, for tomorrow I will deliver them into your hand. You know, there's never a bad time to seek the Lord, is there? It's always a good time to seek God, but especially when we hit setbacks and we're confused about His will and like, what is going on, Lord? That is the perfect time to reach out to God, like Israel does here. Israel seeks the Lord, and He answers. He tells them, first of all, send out Judah. Send Judah first against Benjamin. Well, they do that. I mean, that's very clear. We love it when God has a clear answer like that. And so they follow through, and that's when they hit the next setback. They're losing the battle. They're losing big time. Not expected at all, right? They attack Benjamin twice, and both times they lose thousands of men. 21,000 on one day, 18,000 on the next. Those are some big numbers of men that were slain. And so they wonder, how is this happening, God? What's going on? I mean, we're seeking you before each battle to confirm your will. We're sending in the troops you want us to send, all this. And we're fulfilling your will as you place that vision on our hearts to bring judgment on the evildoers in alignment with the law. So how can it be that our efforts are failing? We always think that God's will is going to be a steady incline to victory, don't we? We always see it just going smoothly up and up. That's what we see. But it's more like that stock ticker, like we showed at the very beginning, isn't it? That's a little more how it goes. And, we read accounts in the Bible where things did go smoothly. And we hear testimonies of ministries where everything just went boom, 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 and it was perfect, and it was easy, and it was so great. And so sometimes we start to equate, success in this world must mean that we're doing God's will. When we see success the way we define it, that everything goes perfect, well, that means you're in God's will. There couldn't be any setbacks in His will, and yet we find that in this chapter, don't we? God doesn't really define success the same way that we do, is what we find. His goals might be completely different than what we think they should be. For instance, look at what good has come in this story so far. As Israel is all fired up with zeal for God's law. Now, when have we seen that in the book of Judges? Never. We haven't seen that at all. They're all fired up for God's law. All Israel is seeking God's will, even with tears. We haven't seen that in the book of Judges. These are great things that are happening. And all Israel is looking to the priests of God, the real priests, for direction from the Lord. This sounds like a lot of spiritual success, doesn't it? It sounds like a spiritual revival that was happening there in Israel. And, God's just bringing all these people into line, into focus on Him. I mean, it's an awesome thing that He's doing there. In the same way, God does a work in us as He works through us in this life. God is always working in our lives to make us more like Jesus. That process of sanctification that He does in working inside of us, changing us to be more conformed to His image. If we had no disappointments, would we have a deep faith, right? Think about that. If we never dealt with disappointment, how deep would our faith be if everything always just went our way? If everything was always perfect, would we learn to trust God If there weren't ever times that were scary and confusing in our lives, would we actually trust God the way that He wants us to grow in trusting Him? Would we truly worship Him for all the blessings that we had if those blessings were never in doubt? You know, if those blessings were never in doubt, would we actually appreciate the blessings that we had? Now, I'm not talking about our salvation. That is not in doubt. But you think about the blessings we have in this life, right? We all remember back in 2021, the winter storm that hit here in Texas, and many lost power. Here in Taylor, we all lost our water. And, you know, water coming out of the tap is one of those things you take for granted, isn't it? I mean, you just assume there's always going to be running water there. We may not like the bill that comes afterwards, but we assume there's always going to be water there until it's not there. Until it's not there. I'll never forget, you know, us having pots and pans under all the sinks and the sink turned on so that if any water came out, we would get it, you know, because our house is kind of uphill in the water supply in Taylor. And so it wouldn't be until like we were getting ready for bed and all of a sudden hear a blink. Oh, wow, there's water, you know, like jump to the scene, you know, to make sure we get as much water as we can as it's coming through the pipes there. But you realize what a blessing running water is when you don't have it, right? And so many other blessings are the same way. And so God uses these setbacks to grow us. And God also, sometimes in these setbacks, or really all the time, ultimately, God is using these setbacks to prepare us for victory. Ultimately for victory. Next time we come together, we're going to see this was true for Israel. We already read verse 28 there, where it talks about the victory that God has promised is coming. Setbacks are going to lead to that victory for them. And we know ultimately for us as Christians, everyone who's a Christian today, any setbacks in our life, they're going to lead to our victory too. It may not always be in this life. The victory may not always be in this life, but the victory then will come after this life. When we're with the Lord, where how we went through these trials and so forth is going to be rewarded by God there in heaven. How awesome that will be. Let's close then with prayer. Thank you, Lord God, that you are working in our lives, Lord. Thank you that the way we see you're working in the lives of the Israelites, God, you work in our lives too. You're always wanting to draw us closer to you. That's your number one goal, for us to be closer to you, no matter what may happen in our ministries and so forth, in our personal lives. Your number one goal is for us to be nearer to you. And Lord, we pray that we would submit to that process, submit to that sanctifying process of making us more like Jesus. And Lord, may that be our hearts too, to be closer to you. If that's what we would desire first of all. Like we read, Lord, we sang, the song First Love earlier. May that be true of our hearts, Lord, that you are our first love and our greatest